If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching us from. We continue. Park Avenue gleamed under the September morning sun, its glass skyscrapers reflecting light like giant mirrors pointed toward the sky. Among them, the Thompson Building stood out, not just for its imposing architecture, but for housing the headquarters of the financial empire of William Harrison, the man who at 45 had already conquered more than many would achieve in several lifetimes. William adjusted the platinum watch on his wrist as he stepped out of the black Porsche he had parked in front of the building. It was his morning ritual, arriving before everyone else, watching his company awaken like a kingdom under his command. With firm steps and chin held high, he crossed the main lobby, where the security guard was already waiting for him with a respectful gesture. "Good morning, Mr. Harrison," said the man, opening the door that gave access to the exclusive elevators. William responded with only an almost imperceptible movement of his head. For him, those who served him were like pieces of a larger machinery, necessary but replaceable. In his office on the top floor, the city of New York stretched out like a carpet at his feet. From there, he could contemplate what he considered to be the result of his business genius, a metropolis where only the strongest, the smartest, and the most ruthless survived. "Sir, your first meeting has been moved up to 9 o'clock, announced Jessica, his executive assistant, as she entered. The room with a meticulously organized agenda and a cup of premium Colombian coffee. "And who decided that without consulting me?" he asked without shifting his gaze from the window. "It was a request from Mr. Rodriguez. He said he has an unavoidable commitment later and needed to adjust the time." William turned slowly, a cold smile forming on his face. "Call him. Tell him the meeting remains at the original time. If he can't attend, we'll certainly find another company interested in our investment." Jessica hesitated for a moment, but nodded and left quickly. William knew he was being cruel, but the business world was no place for sentimentality. Rodriguez needed to understand who he was dealing with, a man who dictated the rules, not followed them. Born into a middle-class family in rural Virginia, William had built his empire from scratch, or at least that was the story he liked to tell. He conveniently omitted that his first significant investment had come from an inheritance from a distant uncle, and that his connections with influential politicians had opened doors that remained closed to others. For him, these were just tools he knew how to use better than others. His smartphone vibrated in his pocket. It was Christina, his third wife, 20 years younger, an international model who had abandoned the runways to become Mrs. Harrison. Marriage for William was another successful acquisition. Christina complemented his image as a powerful man with her stunning beauty and youth. "I can't talk now," he said curtly when answering. "I'm about to go into a meeting." "But William, we need to decide. About your son's birthday party. Michael is—" "Send an email to Jessica with the details. She'll take care of it," he interrupted, ending the call without waiting for a response. Michael, his 10-year-old son from his second marriage, was almost a stranger to him. William rationalized his absence as necessary. He was building an empire that the boy would inherit one day. The time for emotional bonds would come later, when he had achieved everything he aspired to, although that moment always seemed to move toward a distant future. At 11 o'clock, after 3 consecutive meetings where he demonstrated why he was considered one of the most feared businessmen in the country, William decided to do something unusual. He dismissed his driver and chose to walk a few blocks to the restaurant where he would have lunch with a potential foreign investor. He wanted to feel the pulse of the city, observe the smaller gears that made the system work. At the corner of Madison Avenue and Park Avenue, while waiting for the traffic light to change, his gaze caught something that stood out from the urban and sophisticated landscape. A small improvised stand where an elderly woman with grey hair offered what appeared to be artisanal tea in small disposable cups. The scene intrigued him not for its novelty. Street vendors were common in New York, but for the stubbornness of that woman trying to survive in one of the most expensive square meters in North America. The light changed, but instead of continuing on his way, William felt strangely drawn to the scene. He approached the stand, observing the hurried passers-by who barely noticed the woman's existence. She must have been in her 70s, perhaps more, with deep lines on her face that told stories. William couldn't decipher. Her hands, marked by time and work, arranged small bags of herbs and spices with an almost reverential care. "Would you like to try some tea, sir?" she asked, noticing his presence. Her voice had a southern cadence, probably from Georgia or Alabama. William didn't respond immediately. He observed the simplicity of the arrangement: a folding table, some disposable cups, a thermos that had seen better days, and a surprising variety of herbs in small, hand-labeled jars. "How much does it cost?" he finally asked, more out of curiosity than real interest in the product. $5 for a small cup, 10 for a large one. But for you, who seems to especially need a moment of pause, the first one's on the house," she replied, with a smile that completely transformed her wrinkled face. William felt a mixture of surprise and indignation. That lady, clearly in a precarious situation, offering him charity. The irony of the situation almost made him laugh. He, who could buy her entire stock without even noticing the difference in his bank account, receiving a free tea. "And what makes you think I need a pause?" he asked, a tone of challenge in his voice. The old woman studied him for a moment before responding, her dark eyes seeming to see beyond the impeccable facade of his Italian suit. "The eyes never lie, my child. Yours are screaming for a moment of peace." Something in the simplicity of that observation hit William unexpectedly. He felt exposed, as if that stranger had penetrated all the barriers he had built over the years. "Very well, I'll accept your tea," he said, trying to regain control of the situation. "But I insist on paying. How much would your entire stock cost?" The question came out as a provocation. In his mind, he was about to show that woman the insignificance of her small business in the face of his economic power. "You want to buy everything?" The old woman smiled again, unfazed. "And what would you do with so much tea?" "Does that matter? I'm willing to pay." "Ah, my child, not everything in this life is for sale. These teas aren't just products, they're stories, they're cures, they're moments." She served a small cup of an amber liquid and extended it to him. "Try this one. It's special." William took the cup more by reflex than by will. The aroma was surprisingly complex for something so simple. While contemplating the liquid, something caught his attention. Hanging around the woman's neck, partially hidden by a colorful shawl, was a locket. Inside it, he could see what appeared to be a faded photo of a young man. William brought the tea to his lips, more out of politeness than interest, expecting to taste an ordinary flavor that would justify his initial perception of that small street business. To his surprise, the liquid revealed itself to be extraordinarily complex. Notes of cinnamon and anise danced with a sweet background of chamomile and something he couldn't identify. It was, without a doubt, superior to many expensive teas he had tried in luxury restaurants. "What is this?" he asked, unable to hide the amazement in his voice. The old woman smiled, that same smile that seemed to carry decades of untold stories. "It's my special blend. I call it Memory of Sarah. It has herbs from the plains and the mountains, harvested at the right time, dried the right way." "Sarah, like in the novel?" "Like my grandmother," she replied. "She taught me that a good tea isn't made just with quality ingredients, but with the stories you put into it." William observed the woman more carefully. There was something about her that stood out from the typical image of a street vendor. Her hands, despite being marked by work, had precise and elegant movements. Her posture, even given the simplicity of her stand, carried a dignity that seemed out of place in that context. "You didn't tell me your name," William commented, surprising himself with his own interest. "Mrs. Eleanor Jackson," she responded, extending her hand in a simple but firm gesture. "And you must be someone important, by the suit and the watch." William hesitated for a moment before shaking that hand. In his world, physical contacts were calculated, strategic, handshakes that sealed million-dollar deals, protocol embraces at charity events, cold kisses at social gatherings. Mrs. Eleanor's touch was different, warm, authentic, devoid of ulterior motives. "William Harrison," he finally responded, without adding his titles or achievements as he normally would. "Harrison?" repeated Mrs. Eleanor, as if savouring the surname. "I know that name from somewhere." "Probably from business magazines or newspapers," said William, allowing himself a moment of vanity. "My company is the largest in the financial sector in the country." Mrs. Eleanor shook her head. "No, that's not it. My reading is more recipe books and the letters my grandson sends me from time to time." Her eyes lit up at the mention of her grandson, and instinctively her hand touched the locket. William noticed the gesture and, moved by a curiosity he couldn't explain, pointed to the object. "Is that your grandson in the photo?" Mrs. Eleanor's face transformed, mixing pride and longing in an expression that William found strangely touching. She opened the locket, revealing the image of a young man with strong features, similar to hers, with a confident smile. "This is my Jason, my only grandson. He's been in Portland, Oregon for 5 years, working as a chef in a famous restaurant." "There? Chef?" William raised his eyebrows, surprised. It wasn't the career he would expect from the grandson of a street vendor. "Yes, and a good one." The pride in Mrs. Eleanor's voice was palpable. "He started washing dishes in a restaurant here in New York, then worked his way up. He has a special talent for creating dishes with ingredients from our land." Her voice lowered a bit. "He wanted me to go live with him, but I didn't want to leave New York. This city can be harsh, but it's been my home for 40 years. Something in the story awakened a distant memory in William of his own grandmother. Martha Harrison had been a constant figure in his childhood in rural Virginia, her hands always busy in the kitchen, preparing treats that they sold to supplement the family's income. When William earned his first large sum of money, he thought about buying a better house for her, but discovered it was too late. Martha had passed away without him even having time to say goodbye, so absorbed was he in his professional ascent. "Does your grandson visit you often?" he asked, disguising the unexpected emotion that the memory of his grandmother had brought him. Mrs. Eleanor's smile faltered for a moment. "He's very busy. The last time was 2 years ago, when he had a culinary event here, but we talk on the phone whenever possible, and he sends money every month." She made a gesture encompassing her small stand. "I don't need this to survive, you know. I do it because I like it, because it keeps me active, because I love seeing people's faces when they try my teas." William checked his watch, suddenly, aware that he was already late for his business lunch. On any other day, he would have simply left some change and departed without further words. But something kept him there, caught in a conversation with that lady who, until minutes ago, didn't even exist on his radar. "I need to go," he said, taking his wallet from the inside pocket of his jacket. "How much do I owe you for the tea?" "I already said the first one's on the house," replied Mrs. Eleanor firmly. "I insist," countered William, extending a $100 bill. Mrs. Eleanor looked at the bill and then at him, an expression of amusement on her wrinkled face. "Do you have change for $100? Because I don't." The situation was absurd. There he was, William Harrison, accustomed to dealing with millions in daily transactions, prevented from paying for a simple tea because the vendor didn't have change. He laughed, a genuine laugh that he hadn't felt in a long time. "Keep the change, then." "No way." Mrs. Eleanor crossed her arms, resolute. "I don't accept handouts, not even from rich men. If you want to help me, come back another day and buy more of my tea. Or better yet, tell your friends about it." The response caught him off guard. In his world, everything and everyone had a price. The idea of someone refusing money, especially someone in apparently precarious circumstances, was disconcerting. "Then I'll take a bag of your special tea," he decided, putting away the $100 bill and looking for a smaller one. "Good choice," approved Mrs. Eleanor, carefully selecting a fabric bag with dried herbs. 2 teaspoons for each cup, let it steep for 5 minutes, no more than that. And drink it thinking of something good, something that makes you smile. The tea feels the intention of the one who prepares it. William paid with a $20 bill, this time accepted without hesitation, and put the bag in his jacket pocket. He was about to say goodbye when a stronger gust of wind shook the small stand, threatening to knock over some of the jars. Instinctively, he extended his hand to hold one that was about to fall. "Thank you," said Mrs. Eleanor, quickly adjusting her belongings. "The weather is changing. When the wind comes like this from the south, it's a sign of heavy rain." "You should have a better structure," observed William, noticing how the improvised stand barely offered adequate protection. "This wouldn't withstand a storm." Yes, before I had a larger, sturdier stall, but I had to sell it when I needed money to help my Jason go to Portland." She shrugged, as if the sacrifice were insignificant. "It was worth it. He's fulfilling his dream." Something in the simplicity of that statement hit William deeply. Here was a woman who had given up her own comfort for someone else's dream. In his life, William only knew the opposite movement, people sacrificing their dreams for his, employees giving up weekends with family to complete projects, smaller partners accepting unfavorable agreements to maintain their partnership. "I have a meeting now," he said, extending his hand to say goodbye. "It was interesting meeting you, Mrs. Eleanor." She shook his hand with that same surprising firmness. "The pleasure was mine, Mr. Harrison. And remember, tea likes good intentions." William walked away, immersing himself again in the human current that flowed down Park Avenue. As he walked, his hand unconsciously touched the pocket where he had stored the tea bag. Something in that brief encounter had disturbed the meticulously constructed balance of his life, like a stone thrown into a placid lake, creating ripples that expanded in all directions. He arrived at the restaurant 15 minutes late, something unprecedented in his rigorously controlled routine. The foreign investor was already waiting, visibly irritated with the wait. On any other day, William would have dominated the situation with his imposing presence and calculated charm. But that afternoon, while discussing numbers and projections, his mind wandered to the image of Mrs. Eleanor and her locket, to the untold stories of her life, to the stark contrast between the simplicity of her existence and the complexity of the tea she produced. That night, William's penthouse apartment, with its 6,000 square feet in the Upper East Side, seemed strangely empty. Christina had left a note saying she would sleep at a friend's house after a charity event. Michael was with his mother, as in almost every week. The only sounds were the distant hum of the air conditioning and the occasional tinkling of ice cubes in his whiskey glass. Sitting on the balcony that offered a panoramic view of the illuminated city, William realized he couldn't get rid of the image of Mrs. Eleanor. There was something about her that deeply bothered him, not for who she was, but for what her existence represented, a completely opposite life path to his own, based on values he had discarded long ago. Almost without thinking, he took from his pocket the tea bag he had bought. The aroma, even contained by the fabric, evoked distant memories. His grandmother's kitchen in Virginia, the wood stove, the stories told during breakfast preparation. Memories he had stored in some remote compartment of his mind, considered irrelevant to the man he had become. Moved by an impulse he couldn't explain, he went to the kitchen, an environment he rarely frequented in his own home. He had to open several cabinets before finding where the housekeeper kept the tea utensils. He filled a kettle with water and set it to heat, following Mrs. Eleanor's instructions with a precision he normally reserved for important negotiations. While waiting for the water to boil, his smartphone vibrated. It was a message from James Mitchell, his main competitor, suggesting a discreet conversation about a possible merger. The proposal was tempting. Together, they would completely dominate the market, eliminating any significant competition. It was the kind of opportunity that would normally keep him awake all night, planning strategies and anticipating moves. However, that night, something was different. He left the phone aside and concentrated on the tea ritual. 2 teaspoons of the dried herbs, hot but not boiling water, 5 minutes of infusion. And as Mrs. Eleanor had instructed, he tried to think of something good while preparing the drink. His mind wandered to an almost forgotten moment. He was 10 years old and had just won a school math championship. Upon arriving home, he found his grandmother Martha waiting for him with a homemade cornbread, his favorite. "I knew you would succeed," she said, with that unshakable certainty that only grandmothers possess. "You have a gift for numbers, like your grandfather had. The memory was so vivid that William could almost smell the bread fresh out of the oven. When the cell phone timer indicated that the 5 minutes had passed, he served the tea in a Chinese porcelain cup that had cost more than many people earned in a month. The first sip instantly transported him back to the small stand on Park Avenue. The flavor was equally complex, but there was something different, something that wasn't present in the sample that Mrs. Eleanor had served him. Perhaps it was the water, perhaps the temperature, or perhaps, he thought with an ironic smile, the tea really did feel the intentions of who prepared it. He took the cup to his office, a sanctuary of mahogany and leather where he made his most important decisions. The walls displayed diplomas, certificates, and photos with influential personalities, a visual testimony of his successful trajectory. In a single frame, almost hidden among the others, was an old photograph. William, at 8 years old, next to his parents and his grandmother Martha, in front of the small house where he had grown up. Looking at that image now, while savoring Mrs. Eleanor's tea, William felt a strange connection between the two women. Both carried that same silent dignity, that strength that didn't need to announce itself. His grandmother had raised 3 daughters alone after his grandfather's early departure, supporting the family with her famous baked goods in the small Virginia town. She never complained, never spoke of difficulties. She just did what needed to be done, with the same grace with which she served coffee to visitors. The cell phone vibrated again. This time it was Jessica, sending the next day's schedule. 3 meetings in the morning, lunch with the mayor, a video conference with international investors in the afternoon, and a charity dinner at night, the frantic pace that had defined his existence for years. As he read the commitments, an idea began to form in his mind. It was absurd, impractical, completely outside his normal pattern of behavior. But the more he drank the tea, the stronger the idea became, until he found himself typing a response to Jessica. Cancel all commitments until noon. I have an urgent, personal matter. He sent the message before he could change his mind, knowing it would cause a small chaos in the meticulously planned routine of his office. Jessica would probably think he was sick, or that some family emergency had arisen. He never cancelled commitments, especially with so little notice. He finished the tea, feeling a strange tranquility. Tomorrow he would return to Park Avenue, find Mrs. Eleanor again. There were questions he needed to ask, stories he wanted to hear. He didn't know exactly why, but he felt that casual encounter could be more important than all the meetings he had just cancelled. The next morning, he woke up before the alarm, something rare in his routine. The New York sky was still dark, with that characteristic mist that precedes dawn in the metropolis. He dismissed his driver and decided to take the subway. Another unthinkable decision in his normal daily life. He wanted to feel the city, observe ordinary people in their morning routine, experience something different from the isolation that his status provided him. The subway car was packed, bodies pressed against each other in an uncomfortable ballet that repeated with each stop. William, in his Italian suit, stood out from the crowd, receiving curious and occasionally hostile looks. He was like a fish out of water, trying to swim in a completely strange environment. He got off at the 51st Street station and walked to the spot where he had met Mrs. Eleanor the day before. Park Avenue was beginning to awaken, with the first hurried workers crossing the sidewalks and stores still closed. But upon arriving at the exact location where the small stand should be, he found only the empty space. He felt a pang of disappointment. Perhaps she only appeared later when traffic increased, or perhaps she changed locations daily, seeking the best spots to sell her products. He decided to wait a while, observing the growing flow of people who passed by indifferently. After 15 minutes, he approached a newspaper vendor who was setting up nearby. "Good morning. I'm looking for a lady who sells artisanal teas. Mrs. Eleanor. She usually stays around here." The man examined him with curiosity. "Mrs. Eleanor. She usually arrives around 9. There are days she doesn't come, especially when it rains, but if you want to find her for sure, she lives in a small apartment building on East 53rd Street near the subway station. Everyone around there knows her." William thanked him and checked his watch. It was only 7:30. He would have to wait longer than he had imagined. The idea of going to Mrs. Eleanor's house crossed his mind, but he immediately discarded it. It would be an invasion of privacy, something completely inappropriate. He decided to have coffee at a nearby bakery while waiting. The establishment was full, with a diverse clientele that included everyone from hurried executives to construction workers. He sat at a table in the corner, ordered an espresso and observed the movement, feeling strangely anonymous amid that crowd. At 9:15, he returned to the location where he had met Mrs. Eleanor. This time, he spotted her from afar, setting up her small stand with slow but precise movements. She wore a simple cotton print dress and the same colorful shawl that partially covered the locket. Her grey hair was tied in a low bun, and there was something in her posture that conveyed a serenity that contrasted with the frantic rhythm of the avenue. He approached, feeling an unusual hesitation. In his world, it was always he who was approached, never the other way around. But before he could say anything, Mrs. Eleanor looked up and smiled, as if she had been waiting for him. "Good morning, Mr. Harrison. Back to try another tea?" The familiarity with which she treated him, as if his return were something perfectly natural and expected, disconcerted him. "How did you know I would come back?" Mrs. Eleanor shrugged, arranging some bags of herbs on the table. "Tea speaks to those who are willing to listen, and you seemed like someone who was beginning to pay attention." There was something in that answer that simultaneously irritated and fascinated him. It was the kind of statement he would normally dismiss as superstition, or at best, as a calculated attempt to create a commercial mystery around a common product. But coming from Mrs. Eleanor, it sounded different. There was an unpretentious sincerity in her words that disarmed any cynicism. "I prepared your tea last night," said William, carefully observing Mrs. Eleanor's reaction. "Following your exact instructions." The woman's face lit up with genuine interest. "And how was the experience?" "Different," he admitted. "The flavor reminded me of things I hadn't thought about in a long time." "Ah, that's the power of memory of Sarah." Mrs. Eleanor smiled, continuing to organize her small stand. "It has the gift of awakening memories that sleep within us. Some people cry when they drink it, others laugh. It depends on what's stored in there." She gently pointed to William's chest. A group of executives hurried past, some casting curious glances at that unusual scene. A clearly powerful man in his impeccable suit, talking with a street vendor as if they were old acquaintances. "Do you have time to talk a bit?" asked William, surprising himself with his own boldness. In his world, time was money, and conversations without a clear commercial objective were considered a waste. "I have all the time in the world," replied Mrs. Eleanor, indicating a small folding bench beside her stand. "Sit down if you don't. Mind the simplicity of the throne." William hesitated for a moment, looking at the bench that seemed too fragile to support his weight. Finally, he sat down carefully, adjusting his suit to avoid wrinkling it. "You mentioned yesterday that you once had a larger business," he began, going straight to the point, as was his custom. "What exactly happened?" Mrs. Eleanor observed him for a few moments, as if evaluating how much of her story she should share. Finally, while preparing tea for a customer who had stopped by, she began to speak. "It wasn't just a larger stand, Mr. Harrison. It was a store. One of the first artisanal tea houses in New York." Her voice carried a discreet pride. "It was on Madison Avenue, not far from here. It was called Essences of America." The name triggered a memory for William. He had heard of that establishment, perhaps in some casual conversation about the golden days of central New York. "For 25 years, that store was my life," continued Mrs. Eleanor, after serving the customer. "I started with knowledge I brought from rural Georgia, where I was born. My family had the gift of knowing plants, knowing what each one could do for the body and soul. When I came to New York in the 70s, I brought that knowledge with me." "And how did you manage to open the store?" asked William, genuinely interested. He knew well the challenges of entrepreneurship, even with all the privileges he had had. "With a lot of sweat and a little luck," smiled Mrs. Eleanor. "I worked as a housekeeper for 10 years, saving every penny. My employer, Dr. Thompson, was a doctor. and was interested in the medicinal properties of the plants I knew. He helped me make contacts, introduced me to influential people who appreciated natural products when that was still considered a hippie thing. William nodded, imagining the New York of that time, so different from today's metropolis. Gradually, I built a loyal clientele, people who came not just for the tea but for the experience, the conversation, the advice that came with the drink. Mrs. Eleanor paused, her eyes fixed on a distant point, as if she could see her old store through time. In the best years, we had 10 employees. We supplied fine restaurants, spas, even some celebrities. And what happened? Insisted William, realizing there was more to the story than she was telling. Mrs. Eleanor's face darkened slightly. Life happened, my child. First came my husband James's illness, a cancer that consumed not only his health but also our savings. Even with everything I knew about medicinal plants, I couldn't save him. Her voice trembled slightly, but she continued. Then, when he was gone, came the depression. I lost the spirit to manage the business. The employees began to take advantage of my absence. There were misappropriations, problems with suppliers. When I realized I was drowning in debt, William felt an unexpected empathy. In his field, he had seen countless promising companies disappear due to similar problems. The death of our founder, poor management during a period of personal crisis. And your grandson, Jason, right? Couldn't he have helped? Jason was only 17 when all this happened, explained Mrs. Eleanor. He was already showing his talent in the kitchen, already dreaming of being a chef. The little I managed to save from the store, I invested in him. I paid for a culinary course, bought the first equipment. It was the best decision I made. As Mrs. Eleanor spoke, William noticed how her hands, despite her age, moved with elegance as she organized the small jars of herbs. There was a technique there, a deep knowledge that came from decades of practice. So you sacrificed your business for your grandson's dream, summarized William, unable to hide a note of admiration in his voice. I don't see it as a sacrifice, replied Mrs. Eleanor with simplicity, just as a continuation. What I did with herbs, he does with food. We transform simple elements into experiences that touch people. The difference is that he has the chance to go much further than I ever could. William thought of his own son, Michael. What were the boy's dreams? Would he, William, ever give up something important to help his son fulfill his aspirations? The question deeply troubled him. And how did you end up selling tea on the street? He asked, trying to push away those uncomfortable thoughts. That was almost by accident. Mrs. Eleanor smiled, serving a tea for herself and offering another to William, who accepted without hesitation. After I closed the store, I spent some time doing nothing, living off the rent from a small apartment I managed to keep. But I felt useless, wasting the knowledge my family had passed down for generations. One day I took some herbs I still had at home, prepared some blends and came to the street just to see what would happen. Her eyes sparkled with the memory. And you know what happened? That first day, a former customer from the store passed by me, recognized me, and almost cried with joy. She said she had looked for my teas everywhere since the store had closed. She bought my entire stock that day and spread the word to friends that I was back. That's how I started again at 70. The story touched William in a way he didn't expect. There was something deeply honest and resilient in that narrative, without self-pity, without lamentations for what could have been, just a pragmatic adaptation to circumstances and a refusal to give up on what she loved doing. You're quite the entrepreneur, Mrs. Eleanor, he said sincerely. Many of the executives I know wouldn't have your determination. She laughed, a light and genuine sound that seemed out of place in the hustle and bustle of Park Avenue. I don't know if I'm an entrepreneur. I just know that life is too short to stand still when you have something good to offer the world. William drank his tea in silence, absorbing those simple but deeply meaningful words. Suddenly he remembered the locket and the photo of the grandson. And Jason, how is he doing in Portland? Mrs. Eleanor's face lit up again. My grandson is the sous chef of one of the most important restaurants in the city, Pacific Northwest. Flavors. He works with ingredients from the forest, creates dishes that tell stories. He's making a name for himself, appearing in specialized magazines. She took the locket and opened it, showing the photo to William. This photo, Is from when? He went there 5 years ago. He must look different now. Young people change so quickly. There was a mixture of pride and melancholy in her voice that William recognized. It was the same tone his own mother used when talking about his professional achievements, marveling at his success, but secretly feeling the distance that this same success had created between them. "You must miss him a lot," he commented, surprising himself with his own sensitivity. "Every day," admitted Mrs. Eleanor, "but I know he's following his path, and that comforts me. We talk on the phone. He tells me about the dishes he's creating, about the new ingredients he discovers. Sometimes he sends photos. It's not the same as having him nearby, but it's a connection." A customer approached, interrupting the conversation. William observed with fascination the transformation of Mrs. Eleanor, from a lady sharing personal memories to a confident specialist explaining the properties of different blends, advising which would be best for the insomnia that afflicted the man. There was deep knowledge there, an expertise that didn't come from diplomas or certifications, but from decades of practical experience and family tradition. When the customer walked away satisfied with his purchase, William made an impulsive decision. "Mrs. Eleanor, I have a proposal for you." She looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "What kind of proposal, Mr. Harrison?" "I'd like to help you rebuild your business, not just a larger stand, but a store. A place where you can share all this knowledge properly with the dignity you deserve." The words came out before he could fully analyze them, moved by an impulse he couldn't explain rationally. Mrs. Eleanor studied him for a long moment, her serene face revealing little of her thoughts. "And why would you do that?" she finally asked, her voice calm but incisive. "What would you gain by helping an old tea vendor?" The question caught him off guard. In his business world, no one questioned motivations, only results and returns on investments. But there was Mrs. Eleanor, going straight to the point that he himself hadn't completely considered. Why was he proposing this? William felt the weight of Mrs. Eleanor's gaze, those eyes that seemed to see beyond appearances. For a moment, he thought about resorting to the rehearsed answers he used in interviews, talking about corporate social responsibility, about supporting local entrepreneurs, about diversifying investments. But something in that woman's presence demanded truth, an honesty he rarely practiced. "I'm not entirely sure," he finally admitted, surprising himself with the confession. "Maybe because your story reminded me of my own grandmother. Maybe because I see value in what you do, a value that goes beyond money." He paused, searching for the right words. "Or maybe because I need to prove to myself that I'm still capable of building something real, something that isn't just numbers on a spreadsheet." Mrs. Eleanor nodded slowly, as if that answer, in all its uncertainty, was exactly what she expected to hear. "I appreciate your honesty, Mr. Harrison, and your offer is generous. But I need to think." She arranged some bags of herbs before continuing. "Not that I wouldn't want to have my store back, it would be a dream. But the last time I mixed business with feelings, I ended up losing everything. And at my age, I don't have the energy to start from scratch again." "I understand your concern," replied William, his businessman's mind already formulating solutions. "We can establish clear terms, a contract that protects your interests. You would maintain total control over aspects related to the products, quality, suppliers. I would take care of only the financial and administrative part." An enigmatic smile appeared on Mrs. Eleanor's face. "You don't seem like the type of man who settles for only anything, Mr. Harrison." The observation, so precise and direct, drew a genuine laugh from William. "You caught me. I have a reputation for being controlling. But this would be a different arrangement. I'm proposing a partnership, not an acquisition." "And what would happen if we disagreed about the direction of the business?" asked Mrs. Eleanor, demonstrating a business acumen that surprised William. "If you wanted to expand quickly, open franchises, create a brand that you could sell to a multinational, while I preferred to keep the business small, personal, faithful to traditions?" The question revealed that, despite her apparent simplicity, Mrs. Eleanor perfectly understood the dynamics of the corporate world. She had probably faced similar proposals in the past when her original store was thriving. In that case, your vision would prevail, affirmed William, surprising himself with his own response. In any other negotiation, he would never cede strategic control. This would be your business, Mrs. Eleanor. I would just be a supporter, a facilitator. My goal isn't to transform your teas into a global commodity, but to help you recover what you lost, and maybe go a little beyond. And why should I believe that? The question didn't sound like a challenge, but like genuine curiosity. William reflected for a moment. It was a fair question. His market reputation wasn't of someone who settled for secondary roles or niche businesses. Because this project wouldn't be about money for me, he finally said. It would be about redemption, perhaps. About honoring the memory of my grandmother, who also had a small business and never received the support she deserved. About using my knowledge for something different from what I usually do. Mrs. Eleanor observed him for a long moment, her eyes evaluating not just his words, but also what wasn't being said. Finally, she nodded. Let's do this, Mr. Harrison. You'll give me 2 days to think about your proposal. Meanwhile, I suggest you also reflect on whether this is really what you want. 2 days away from that frantic pace you live in, drinking my tea every night, listening to what it has to say. She carefully selected 3 different bags from her collection. This one is for morning, this for afternoon, and this for night. Each has a different message. Drink them at the right times, with an open mind, and then tell me if your proposal is still standing. William took the bags, feeling strangely like a student receiving an assignment from a wise teacher. It was a situation completely outside his comfort zone. He, the powerful businessman, accepting conditions from a street vendor. And yet, there was something liberating in that moment. 2 days, he agreed, putting the bags in the inside pocket of his jacket. We'll meet here at the same time. Yes, I'll be waiting, confirmed Mrs. Eleanor. And Mr. Harrison, come with an open heart. The tea will speak louder if you're willing to listen. They said goodbye with a handshake that this time seemed to seal something more significant than a casual meeting. William walked away, immersing himself again in the human current of Park Avenue, but feeling different, as if he carried a valuable secret in his pocket. Upon arriving at his office, he found Jessica visibly concerned. His unexpected absence in the morning had caused a small chaos. Hastily rescheduled meetings, improvised excuses for important clients, speculation among employees about possible health problems. "Is everything all right, sir?" she asked, following him to his office. "I was worried when you cancelled all morning commitments." "I'm great, Jessica," he replied, feeling strangely invigorated. "I just needed to resolve an urgent personal matter." The vague explanation clearly didn't satisfy the assistant, accustomed to knowing every detail of her boss's schedule, but she was too professional to insist. "Mr. Mitchell called 3 times, she informed, switching to practical matters. "He seems quite anxious to discuss the merger proposal, and the mayor confirmed tomorrow's lunch." William sat at his desk, observing the pile of documents that awaited him, the dozens of unread emails on his computer, the accumulated messages on his smartphone. It was his world, a world of negotiations, decisions, power. A world that, until 2 days ago, was all he knew and valued. "About Mitchell, tell him I need more time to analyze the proposal. As for the mayor—" He paused, remembering the tea bags in his pocket and the promise made to Mrs. Eleanor. "Keep the lunch, but reorganize my schedule for the next 2 days. I want only the essential commitments, nothing that can be postponed or delegated." Jessica stared at him with evident surprise. In 15 years as his assistant, she had never heard him ask for a reduction in his schedule. On the contrary, William always sought to maximize every minute of his day, stacking meetings and commitments as if time were an adversary to be conquered. "Any health problem, sir?" she risked, genuinely concerned. "No, Jessica, I'm perfectly fine." He smiled, a smile different from the usual, less calculated. "Just re-evaluating some priorities." That night, after a surprisingly calm day by his standards, William prepared the evening tea that Mrs. Eleanor had given him. The aroma was different from the others, deeper, with notes of chamomile, lavender, and something indefinable that reminded him of old wood. Following the ritual that was already beginning to become familiar, He waited the 5 minutes of infusion thinking of something good. His mind wandered to a recent memory. Michael's face illuminated with joy when, in a rare moment of paternal presence, William had taken him sailing in the Hamptons. The boy had shown surprising courage in the small sailboat, facing the waves, with determination and enthusiasm. "Look, Dad, I'm controlling the boat by myself," he had shouted, his face speckled with salt water and sun. William recalled the pride he had felt at that moment, a pride different from that associated with business achievements, purer, deeper. The first sip of tea brought an unexpected feeling of calm. Sitting on his balcony, observing the lights of New York, William felt a weight being slowly removed from his shoulders. It was as if, for the first time in years, he allowed himself to simply be, without the constant need to prove his worth through conquests and acquisitions. His cell phone vibrated. It was Christina, probably wanting to discuss preparations for some social event. Surprising himself, William set the device aside without checking the message. The world could wait one night. The next day, he followed Mrs. Eleanor's guidance and prepared the morning tea before leaving for the office. This one had a more vibrant aroma, with citrus notes and a touch of ginger. While drinking it, watching the sunrise through the window of his apartment, an idea began to form in his mind, not just about the potential partnership with Mrs. Eleanor, but about a possible reconciliation with parts of himself that he had abandoned on the path to success. At the office, he surprised his employees with a more relaxed and attentive approach. Instead of harsh orders and impossible expectations, he found himself really listening to his teams, considering their ideas, seeing them as people and not just as tools to achieve results. "Sir, is everything all right?" asked Robert, his financial director, after a meeting, where William had accepted a suggestion that he would normally have rejected without thinking twice. "Why does everyone keep asking me that?" laughed William. "Yes, Robert, I'm perfectly fine. Just seeing things from a different perspective." Into the afternoon, he prepared the third tea in his own office, using a small electric kettle that surprised Jessica when she entered with some documents to sign. "I didn't know you appreciated teas," she commented, observing the process with curiosity. "I'm discovering new tastes," replied William, smiling as he felt the herbal aroma that spread through the room. "Would you like to try?" The casual offer to share something personal was so out of the ordinary that Jessica almost dropped the documents she was holding. In 15 years, William had never offered even a coffee to her. "Yes, thank you," she replied, still astonished. While drinking tea together, William surprised himself conversing with Jessica about matters beyond work, about her 2 teenage children, her husband who was a university professor, her dream of someday opening a small inn on the North Shore. It was as if, for the first time, he saw the person behind the efficient assistant who had managed his professional life for so long. At the end of the second day, after fulfilling his promise to drink the 3 teas and reflect on his decisions, William was certain. He wanted to proceed with the proposal for Mrs. Eleanor, but now his vision was different, clearer, and, in a way, more humble. It wasn't just about a financial investment or a charity project to appease some unconscious guilt. It was about connection, about honoring his own roots, about using his resources and knowledge for something that transcended the mere accumulation of wealth. On the morning of the third day, William woke up before the alarm, feeling an anticipation he hadn't experienced since his first big deals. He prepared carefully, opting for a less formal suit than usual, something that wouldn't stand out so much in the Park Avenue crowd. On the way to meet Mrs. Eleanor, he did something impulsive. He stopped at a florist and bought a small arrangement of aromatic herbs, lavender, rosemary, and basil, believing it would be a more appropriate gift for her than traditional flowers. Upon arriving at the usual spot, he found Mrs. Eleanor already set up, serving a young couple who seemed fascinated with her explanations about the different types of tea. William waited patiently, observing the naturalness with which she transmitted her knowledge, the way her eyes sparkled when talking about the properties of each herb. There was a genuine passion there, something he rarely saw in his own business world, where enthusiasm was often just a calculated performance to impress investors or motivate employees. When the couple walked away, satisfied with their purchase, William approached, extending the small herb arrangement. "Good morning, Mrs. Eleanor. I thought you might like this." The elderly woman's face lit up with a warm smile. "How kind, Mr. Harrison. You hit the nail on the head." She accepted the gift, inspecting the herbs with an expert's eyes. Lavender to calm the spirit, rosemary to strengthen memory, basil to attract prosperity. A powerful combination. "It was instinct," admitted William. "It just seemed right." "Instincts speak when the mind quiets down," replied Mrs. Eleanor, carefully placing the arrangement beside her products. "So, did you drink the teas as I recommended?" "All three at the indicated times, and as you suggested, I reflected a lot." "And what did they tell you?" The question might seem strange to anyone else, but William perfectly understood what she meant. It wasn't just about the flavor or aroma, but the complete experience, the reflections that each infusion had provoked. "They reminded me of who I was before becoming who I am now," he answered, surprising himself with the depth of his own revelation. "They made me think about my son, my grandmother, paths not taken." Mrs. Eleanor nodded as if she already expected this response. "And your proposal? Is it still standing?" "Firmer than ever," confirmed William, "but with some modifications I'd like to discuss." In the next 30 minutes, right there on the sidewalk of Park Avenue, businessman and street vendor discussed the terms of a partnership that, to any external observer, would seem unlikely. William explained his new vision, not just reopening the Essences of America store, but transforming it into a space that would honor tradition while embracing contemporary possibilities, a place that would serve artisanal teas, but that could also host workshops on medicinal herbs, lectures on sustainability, events that celebrated traditional American wisdom. "We could create a space on the second floor for classes and demonstrations," he suggested, his entrepreneurial mind already visualizing the possibilities. "You could pass your knowledge to other people, create a legacy." Mrs. Eleanor's eyes sparkled with the idea. "Like a tea school? I always dreamed of something like that, but never had the resources or knowledge to implement it." "Exactly. And we can go beyond. Imagine an apprentice program where young people interested in natural medicine, sustainable gastronomy, or American cultural traditions could learn directly from you." The conversation flowed naturally, with Mrs. Eleanor contributing ideas based on her vast experience, and William offering practical solutions to make them viable. It was a dynamic different from any negotiation he had ever conducted, without power games, without hidden agendas, just two people united by a common goal and mutual respect. "And what about your grandson?" asked William, remembering Jason. "Might he be interested in participating in this project in some way?" Mrs. Eleanor's face lit up even more. "Jason always said that one day he would return to New York and open a restaurant that would use my teas in his creations. It was always his dream to combine gastronomy with the family's herbal traditions." "Then we should include him in this conversation," suggested William. "Perhaps the space could accommodate not just the tea store, but also a small cafe or restaurant where he could experiment with that fusion." The idea seemed perfect, a synergy between generations, uniting Mrs. Eleanor's traditional knowledge, Jason's culinary expertise, and William's business vision. It was the kind of concept that, in his corporate world, would be called disruptive or innovative, but that there on that busy sidewalk seemed simply human and natural. "I need to call him," decided Mrs. Eleanor, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. "He needs to hear about this directly from me." "Of course," agreed William. "Why don't we do that now? You can use my phone if you want." Mrs. Eleanor hesitated, looking at her small stand. "But what about my customers? I can't just abandon the spot." "I'll take care of that," offered William in a gesture that would have been unthinkable just a few days before. "You explain the basics to me, and I'll serve the customers while you talk with your grandson." And so, in one of the most surreal scenes ever witnessed on Park Avenue, William Harrison, the powerful CEO, the man whose time was disputed by politicians and businessmen from all over the country, found himself behind a small tea stand, serving curious pedestrians, while Mrs. Eleanor, seated on the folding bench, spoke animatedly on the phone with her grandson in Portland. At first, William felt completely out of place. His hands, accustomed to signing million-dollar contracts and handling state-of-the-art electronic devices, seemed awkward when manipulating the small bags of herbs. His voice, normally firm and authoritative in meeting rooms, sounded strangely hesitant when explaining the properties of the different teas. "What is this one good for again?" asked an elderly lady, pointing to a reddish blend. William shot a panicked look at Mrs. Eleanor, who briefly interrupted her phone conversation to whisper, "Hibiscus with cinnamon, circulation and blood pressure." "Ah, yes," recovered William, turning back to the customer. "This is a special blend of hibiscus with cinnamon, excellent for blood circulation and to help regulate blood pressure. It's one of the house specialties." The lady seemed satisfied with the explanation and decided to take 2 bags. William made the sale with a concentration he normally reserved for corporate merger analyses, carefully counting the change and thanking the customer as if she were a crucial investor. As the minutes passed, however, something surprising happened. William began to relax, to feel an unexpected pleasure in that simple task. There was something deeply satisfying in seeing the expression of appreciation on people's faces when they tried the tea, in hearing their problems, insomnia, stress, joint pain, and offering a product that could somehow alleviate them. Mrs. Eleanor, meanwhile, was talking animatedly with Jason, explaining the unusual proposal she had received. William could hear only fragments of the conversation. A serious businessman, reopen the store, space for you too, but the growing enthusiasm in her voice was evident. After almost half an hour, Mrs. Eleanor hung up the phone, her face radiant. Jason was thrilled with the idea. He said he could come to New York in the next few weeks to talk in person. He was already considering coming back, said he misses the city, misses me. Her voice faltered a bit with emotion. "And it seems his partner is expecting a baby. I'm going to be a great-grandmother." The news brought tears to Mrs. Eleanor's eyes, and William felt genuine emotion witnessing that moment. It was as if, somehow, he was participating in something much bigger than a simple business. He was helping to reconnect a family, to build a legacy that would transcend financial balances and quarterly reports. "That's wonderful, Mrs. Eleanor," he said, sincerely happy for her. "We have even more reasons to make this project succeed now." She wiped the tears with the corner of her shawl and nodded. "Yes, we do. And I must say, Mr. Harrison, that you've surprised me, not just with the proposal, but with this." She made a gesture encompassing the stand, where William had served customers for almost half an hour. "I never imagined seeing a man like you selling teas on the street." William laughed, feeling strangely comfortable with the situation. "I confess I didn't either. But it was interesting, different from anything I've ever done. And how did it feel?" The question was simple but profound. William reflected for a moment before responding. "Connected," he finally said. "In recent years, I've spent most of my time making decisions that affect hundreds or thousands of people, but I rarely see the direct impact of those decisions. Here I could immediately see the result of my work, in a person's smile, in another's sincere thanks. It's a completely different scale, but somehow more real." Mrs. Eleanor smiled, as if she had just confirmed something she already suspected. "That, my child, is what I call purpose. It's what keeps me here every day, even when it rains, even when my joints ache with the cold. It's not just for the money. God knows Jason sends me more than I need. It's for the connection, for the purpose." The words resonated deeply with William. Purpose. It was something he had lost sight of at some point in his rise to power, replaced by increasingly ambitious goals, by ever larger numbers in his bank account, by ever more impressive acquisitions. "So," said Mrs. Eleanor, extending her hand, "do we have a deal, Mr. Harrison?" William shook that hand, calloused by time and work, feeling that he was sealing much more than a commercial contract. He was confirming a change of direction in his own life. "We have a deal, Mrs. Eleanor, and please, call me William." 3. Months later, Park Avenue gleamed under the sun of a December morning. Christmas decorations already adorned the store windows, and the frantic movement typical of the end of the year took over the sidewalks. At the corner of 53rd Street, a recently renovated historic building caught the attention of passers-by. Its facade, preserving original architectural elements but with contemporary touches, displayed an elegant sign: Essences of America, Tea House and Gastronomy. Inside, the final preparations for the official inauguration were underway. The E-Sauce ground floor space had been transformed into a sophisticated but welcoming tea shop. Reclaimed wood shelves displayed glass jars with dozens of varieties of herbs, special blends, and accessories for preparing the beverage. In the center, a circular counter allowed for tastings and demonstrations. The upper floor housed a small restaurant with a view of the avenue, where the aromas of American spices were already beginning to mix with the characteristic smell of teas. Mrs. Eleanor moved through the space with surprising energy for her 75 years, adjusting the position of each item, checking the temperature of the infusions that would be served to guests, instructing the young employees, all carefully selected from underprivileged communities in the city and personally trained by her in the last few weeks. The lavender needs to be more to the right. Amy, it doesn't get along well next to the mint. The energies compete, she patiently explained to a young apprentice who nodded with respect and curiosity. Upstairs, Jason Jackson, at 32, commanded his small team in the open kitchen, visible to customers through a large glass panel. His presence was magnetic, tall with the same expressive eyes as his grandmother, but with the vigor of youth and the confidence of someone who mastered his craft. He had returned to New York 2 months ago, bringing with him not only his culinary expertise developed in Portland, but also his partner, Olivia, an anthropologist and university professor, now in the 6th month of pregnancy. The secret is in the timing, instructed Jason to his assistants, while preparing a sauce that incorporated an infusion of lemongrass and ginger. Respect the time of each ingredient, observe how they converse with each other, how the essences transform with heat. Observing everything from a discreet corner, William Harrison felt a satisfaction different from any other he had experienced in his career. This project, which had begun as an inexplicable impulse after a casual encounter, had transformed into something much larger than a simple investment. It was, as Mrs. Eleanor had said, a purpose. The last months had been intense. After that first informal agreement on the sidewalk of Park Avenue, William had mobilized his legal team to structure a partnership that would protect Mrs. Eleanor's interests while making the business viable. To the surprise of his lawyers, he had insisted on extremely favorable terms for the elderly woman. She would maintain majority, control over all decisions related to the products and the philosophy of the establishment, while he would take care of the financial and administrative aspects. Finding the perfect property had been a challenge. William wanted something in the same region where the original store had existed, but prices on Park Avenue were prohibitive, even for someone with his resources, if the goal was to create a sustainable business in the long term. The solution came in the form of a historic building that his own company had acquired years before, with the intention of demolishing it to build a commercial building. The project had been barred by the Historical Heritage Commission, and the property remained unused. William decided to adapt it for the new venture, transforming what was previously a problem in his real estate portfolio into something meaningful. Jason's arrival had added a new dimension to the project. The young chef had brought not only his culinary talent, but a vision that perfectly complemented his grandmother's: respect for traditions combined with contemporary techniques and a deep understanding of American biodiversity. The original idea of a small cafe had evolved into a conceptual restaurant, where each dish incorporated Mrs. Eleanor's teas and herbs in surprising and innovative ways. "It's almost time," announced Jessica, approaching William. His assistant, to the surprise of everyone in the office, had asked to be directly involved in the Essences project, as they called it internally. "The first guests are already arriving." William nodded, discreetly adjusting his tie. He had opted for formal attire but without excesses, He wanted to honor the importance of the moment without overshadowing his partners. This was not a day about William Harrison, the businessman, but about the rebirth of Mrs. Eleanor's dream and the beginning of a new chapter for Jason. The guests began to arrive, a carefully planned mix of influencers, journalists specializing in gastronomy and wellness, former customers of the original store whom Mrs. Eleanor had made a point of locating and inviting personally, and representatives of medicinal herb-producing communities from various regions of America who would be suppliers for the venture. "Nervous?" asked Mrs. Eleanor, approaching William with that serene smile that was now so familiar to him. "A little," he admitted, surprising himself with his own sincerity. "It's different from anything I've ever done." "Different are the paths, but the heart that travels them is the same," she replied, affectionately adjusting the lapel of his jacket. "You're ready, my child." Those simple words, that maternal gesture, touched William deeply. In the last months, Mrs. Eleanor had become much more than a business partner. She was a mentor, a friend, and, in a way, a link to his own grandmother, to the roots he had left behind in his rise to power. Jason joined them, bringing a tray with small porcelain cups. "The first toast is ours, before the madness begins," he explained, distributing the cups. "A special blend I created for today. It has a little bit of each of us." William accepted the cup, observing the amber liquid with golden reflections. The aroma was complex, notes of chamomile and lemongrass that he recognized from Mrs. Eleanor's teas, but with touches of Pacific Northwest spices that Jason had introduced. "To our partnership," proposed Jason, raising his cup, "and to the unexpected paths that life presents us." "To connections that transcend business," added William, feeling the emotion in his own voice. "And to family," completed Mrs. Eleanor, her eyes shining as she looked from her grandson to William. "The one we're born into and the one we choose throughout life." The three sipped the tea in silence, sharing a moment of communion before the doors officially opened to the public. For William, the flavor was a revelation, sweet without being sugary, complex without being confusing, comforting and stimulating at the same time. It was, he realized, a perfect reflection of the journey they had shared until then. The inauguration was a success beyond expectations. Journalists specializing in gastronomy were enchanted with Jason's innovative creations. Dishes like duck with hibiscus and orange reduction, and the dessert, chocolate mousse with American chai infusion, received enthusiastic praise. Digital influencers from the wellness segment vied for space to photograph the elegant store environment and the impressive variety of artisanal teas. But the real heart of the event were Mrs. Eleanor's demonstrations, captivating small groups, with stories about the origin of each herb, traditional harvesting and preparation techniques, and knowledge passed down through generations. In a particularly touching moment, an elderly lady approached Mrs. Eleanor with tears in her eyes. "You probably don't remember me," she said, "but I was a regular customer at your original store. Your teas helped me during a very difficult period in my life when I lost my husband. I looked for you for years after the store closed." Mrs. Eleanor hugged the woman with affection. "Of course I remember you, Mrs. Thompson. The blend of lemon balm with chamomile to help with grief, right? Some connections are never lost." William, discreetly observing the scene, felt an emotion he couldn't completely name. It was something beyond pride in the success of the venture, beyond the satisfaction of a good investment. It was the sensation of being part of something genuine, something that touched real lives in meaningful ways. At the end of the afternoon, when the formal event had ended, but the store remained full of enthusiastic customers, William received an unexpected call. It was Michael, his son, now 11 years old. "Dad, I saw the photos of the inauguration that Christina posted. That place looks amazing. When are you going to take me there? I want to try that green tea ice cream that appeared in the photos." The genuine excitement in the boy's voice touched William deeply. In recent weeks, absorbed by the Essences project, he had made a conscious effort to be more present in his son's life, picking him up from school occasionally, attending a soccer game, simply talking about the day during dinner. Small gestures that, to his surprise, had begun to transform their relationship. "How about tomorrow?" proposed William. "I can pick you up from school and we'll go straight there." And it's not just green tea ice cream. Jason created a hot chocolate with spices that I think you'll love. Deal. The joy in Michael's voice was palpable. Can I bring Kevin too? I told him about the store and he's super curious. Of course you can, replied William, smiling as he realized how he would have found such a request inconvenient just a few months before. The more the merrier. Upon hanging up, he noticed Mrs. Eleanor observing him with that penetrating look that seemed to see beyond appearances. Your boy? She asked, approaching. Yes, confirmed William. He'll come to see the store tomorrow with a friend. Great, approved Mrs. Eleanor. I have a special blend for young people his age. Stimulates concentration without making them too agitated. And Jason is preparing a special menu for children and teenagers with flavors that please the young palate but gradually introduce new elements. William smiled, imagining Michael trying Mrs. Eleanor's teas, perhaps developing the same appreciation that he himself had cultivated in recent months. It was a form of connection he had never considered before, sharing not just time or resources with his son, but experiences, discoveries, perhaps even values. You know, Mrs. Eleanor, he commented, while they observed the movement of the store together, when we met I thought I was offering help to you, that I would be the mentor, the facilitator. But the truth is I received much more than I gave in this partnership. The elderly woman smiled, that wise smile that seemed to carry centuries of knowledge. Life is like that, my child. When we think we are giving, we are receiving. When we think we are teaching, we are learning. It's a cycle like the seasons that determine when each herb should be harvested. Jason approached, bringing a small cup of tea for his grandmother. It's time for your afternoon tea, Grandma. Don't think that just because it's a festive day, you can skip your routine. Mrs. Eleanor accepted the cup with an affectionate smile. My grandson thinks I'm a fragile old lady who needs to be taken care of. It's not what I think, it's what I know, retorted Jason with good humor. If it were up to you, you'd work until you fainted from exhaustion. William observed the interaction between grandmother and grandson with a twinge of good envy. That intimacy, that mutual care, that shared history was something precious. He thought of his own grandmother, Martha, of how his life would have been if he had kept that connection alive, if he had valued that bond as much as he valued his professional goals. But it wasn't too late to create new bonds, to strengthen those that still existed. Michael, his ex-wife Amanda, even Christina, from whom he had been emotionally distancing himself in recent years, all deserved a more present, more connected, more human William. What are you thinking about? Asked Mrs. Eleanor, noticing his contemplative silence. Connections, he responded honestly. How they are lost and how they can be recovered. How a casual encounter can change the direction of an entire life. Mrs. Eleanor nodded, understanding perfectly. Nothing is by chance, my child. That day on Park Avenue when you stopped at my stand, the tea already knew what we needed even before we knew ourselves. The statement might have sounded too mystical for the William of a few months ago, but now he just smiled, accepting the wisdom contained in those simple words. Perhaps it was true. Perhaps there were subtle forces guiding their paths, creating meaningful encounters, offering opportunities for transformation for those willing to see them. Looking around at the vibrant store he had helped create, at Mrs. Eleanor savoring her tea with a serene expression, at Jason leading his team with passion and competence, William felt a deep certainty. His life would never be the same after that unexpected encounter. And that, he realized with gratitude, was the most valuable gift he could have received.